Welcome back to Reading Bear. Today, we will take a look at some new malicious compliance stories. And if you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comments. Let's go!
The first one is titled, "They Fired Me Before I Finished My Day." I'm a nurse. I work in nursing homes, rehabs, old folks' home, etc. I do the paperwork that is sent to Medicare. That paperwork has to be submitted in a timely manner or the facility goes from $700 per day to $200 per day, just tossing numbers out. Don't remember the amount. This is important in a second. I worked for a facility that I loved. The people were wonderful. It was like a huge family. The staff ate their meals with patience, the independent people visited often, and our bosses were easy to approach. Then the bosses retired. At the same time, our board then decided that maybe we would make more money if we hired a management company. All of these changes happened within weeks of each other. They hired a traveling nurse to head up the skilled nursing unit for a year. We didn't react well to her. She never smiled, she would just look at you if you asked a question, and she decided that new rules that didn't apply to her were needed. Shortly after her hiring, she began firing everybody. It was like a war zone had erupted on the floor. Nobody smiled, no laughter, no visitors, no family meals, and loads of stress. I was the last one fired. Oh, I had been written up, 0 write-ups when she walked in, for things like cell phone in the floor, my pocket, drink on my desk in my office, water, and filling a certification form late. Doctor signed it the day it was due, but they photocopied it before I had left for the doctor's office. So they had their 3 write-ups. At 1500 on Friday, the administrator calls me into his office. I'm informed that I've been terminated. I'm floored. I work my butt off. I am actually great at my job. I've been there 7 years. I'm escorted to my office to gather my stuff. They have turned off my computer, asked for my passwords, and escorted me from the building. Here's where the malicious compliance comes in. They called me in to fire me just as I was creating the packet to send to Medicare. I was never able to send it. They never asked if things were situated since it was Friday. I volunteered no information. Remember that timely manner? Well, that Friday was the very last day to submit about 30 different forms. Most were 14-day assessments that literally covered 14 days. Billing friend called and let me know that the default cost over $100,000 by the time they figured everything out. The next one is titled, "Just Doing My Job." I used to work for a collections agency. You see some crap there, but those are stories for another day. This happened when I got promoted to a special skills team. Background: there was no pay raise, and you had to learn an entirely new skill set with no actual training. Fortunately for me, I'm a fast learner and I started getting tasks done quickly and on a pretty large scale. The company, for whatever reason, mismanaged the hell out of this team. Inconsistent bonus structure, unclear actual job description, and there was always some new thing that the team had apparently been neglecting for months, years. Despite it never being brought up, we never had access to it. Because they were so bad at communicating the actually job requirements to us, besides about 4 of the 30+ responsibilities we had, management never knew which end was up. Those who were acquainted with us just let us do our thing because we were the only ones who knew how. Our 2 direct superiors left within 2 weeks of each other. We were temporarily management-less and were honestly as productive, if not more productive. Then, they brought in a new guy. He had never done this job, had no idea if the requirements, and didn't understand our metrics. Once in a one-on-one he got on my butt about just doing my job because he had seen a small dip in my numbers because I was working a project that didn't reflect in my metrics. At this point, I was already doing what had been laid out as my job, plus countless other things that were required but not officially assigned to me, my team. So I clarified with him that he just wanted me to do the job as written on paper. He rolled his eyes, said obviously, and that was that. I stopped doing the extra assignments, stopped tracking the new ones. I had previously been doing about 50 to 60 tasks per hour, but since there were much fewer tasks actually assigned to us, I had to slow down to not be sitting around for most of my shift. This ended up putting me at about 20 per hour, which is technically the requirement for the team metrics. In a team meeting after, he started fuming about how the tasks weren't getting done, and name-dropped me for having such a rapid drop in productivity. I expected this, and on the way out of the meeting simply handed him the paperwork outlining our technical duties. I told him if he wanted me to go so far outside my requirements, I would be willing to negotiate a raise. But that I was meeting metrics, and just doing my job. Ended up leaving for a job that pays more and lets me work from home. The next one is titled, "Take a Few Days to Cool Down." I can do better than that. Our story takes place almost a year ago, right as I was getting out of retail and into my career field. My job at that time was to pick, pack, and ship online orders from the store. I usually started my day between 6 and 7 a.m. and left by 3 or 4 p.m. As we got closer to my last days, management started adding new tasks to my daily workload. Keep in mind this is as the holiday orders are ramping up and we are getting busy. First thing they added? Ship from store now also has to pick and pack in store, pickup and carry out orders. Next it was the non-clothing reshop in the mornings that the night team wouldn't finish. Finally it was adding a set of morning stock batches that I had to pull, push, and back stock by 10 a.m. I gave my employer a whopping 3 weeks notice to find and have me train a replacement. In that time I trained a few people, but none of them could do the work as well or as quickly as I could. Understandable, I had worked there almost 4 years at that point. All of those people I trained were moved to new positions within the week and I never got more than 1 day with them. That company requires at least 4 hours of training for a new task, not including the computer-based portions. I think altogether I got maybe 2 hours with each person. Anyway, 2 days until I'm officially out, I come in at 6:30 a.m. and grab the reshop for the entire non-clothing portion of the store. I finished that around 7:30 a.m., then I started getting the in-store pickup, carry-out orders that have to be done by 8 a.m. I got those done by 8:15 a.m. Morning pulls? Done by 10:15 a.m. Then, I finally got to start on my actual job. I checked the system to see how many SFS orders I have, almost 300 items and counting. It doesn't actually stop adding new ones until 1 p.m. At 10:20 a.m. the store director walks his happy butt on in and immediately asks me why SFS isn't done yet. So I give him the same rundown that you just read. He was not happy. I do not remember his entire lecture. But I do remember that he covered varied topics such as why my then girlfriend, now fiancé, may leave me if I don't get my act together. How these orders really aren't that difficult, and he even explained that he kept pulling people away from this position because he knows that I can do the work and he looks forward to my continued service in this role. Hold up, did he forget that I put in my notice? I tried to explain to him that I had started picking for SFS within the last 5 to 10 minutes, but he didn't hear a word of it and simply said in his most sarcastic, passive-aggressive voice, "If you can't handle it today, I understand. Take a few days off and come back refreshed." So I took my last few days off. When they called me the next week while I was training for my new job, I did not answer. The HR manager at the store finally caught me by calling from his cell phone as I was on lunch. He said they never got my 2 weeks notice and that I was in serious trouble if I didn't show up for my scheduled shifts. I told him, "Oh, no problem, let me just add you to the email chain." And I forwarded him the email chain between me and the store director where I gave him 3 weeks notice and he acknowledged it. Good day in my book. So glad I'm not in retail anymore. The next one is titled, "My Milkshakes Make My Manager Angry." This was a few years ago, but I was reminded of it today in a conversation. I work for a big chain of restaurants and they had recently introduced milkshakes. We were all required to watch videos on how to make them and the videos said that we should suggestively sell them. We never really did because they were time-consuming and just generally annoying to make because you always ended up with milkshake slurry on your hands. So one day my manager was really on my case and just nitpicking everything that I was doing. Normally I was one of the better employees and managers usually left me alone, but I guess I was having an off day. At a certain point I got really irritated and decided that it would be a great time to ask every customer, "Would you like to try one of our new milkshakes as your drink today?" The manager was in the position that was required to make them. After selling several milkshakes that he had to make, the manager started yelling at me. I replied that the training video said that I was supposed to. He told me to stop and I did, but every time he annoyed me in the future, I'd ask the next customer if D liked to try a milkshake. He usually got the point. The next one is titled, Mandatory Late Night Call After You Made Me Hourly? Yes sir. So quick background. I work for a big national company which I will not name because I like being employed, and we have a big software system that the entire company relies on to wrap stuff up and get it ready for the client. It's that last choke point bottleneck where if it dies, literally all the work the rest of the company does is for naught. I run this system at the grunt work day-to-day operational level. This system also typically has upgrades and fixes installed about every 2 weeks, and they always wait until late night on Friday to bring it down and do the install so that it doesn't impact daily business. Now, when these installs occurred, they always get a bunch of people on a call to go through everything and make sure it all works before calling it good for Monday. Being the guy who runs the system all the time, I was always required to be on these calls. I hated them. The calls started at 10 p.m. Friday nights, so I couldn't go out and enjoy my weekend. Would last about 2 hours while the developers installed stuff, and at the very end I pushed one button to kick things off so the suits could see that it was working and everybody was happy. This was literally monkey work, and everyone on those calls could have done it. I volunteered to teach them how, but no, they wanted me on the call. I was salary at the time, so not exactly like I could say no, and I wasn't getting paid anything extra for it. Can you see where this is going yet? Okay, so a few years ago guidelines changed at the government level saying anyone who made $XX,000 per year or less couldn't be defined as salary, they had to be hourly, to stop companies from abusing glorified part-time workers. I made more than that, but the company went overboard because I was somewhere in the general ballpark and they didn't want to risk it, so bam, I'm now hourly. Roughly 2 weeks later, it's deployment call time. I ask if I'm really required to be there or not. Boss man says yes. I don't complain, because at least now I get paid for it. Oh but wait, this isn't any normal deployment, no, this is a big one. They tell me I need to be on the calls that will start up at 5 o'clock right as I'd normally be clocking out for the day. Thinking it would be a quick check-in and then back out until 10 o'clock, I dutifully call in. Nope, this call lasts from 5 o'clock until 10 o'clock when we got to take all of 5 minutes break and get into the other call. Now I'm home short, so I'm sitting on this call in my underwear, and nothing going on requires any input from me at all. Again, I'm not complaining because I'm getting paid for this, and I've got Netflix on in the background. Not only am I getting paid, since I did my full 40 hours that week already, this was overtime. So 10 o'clock deployment stuff starts going on, and by midnight we get to my part. I push the button. I tell them it's going to take about 20 to 30 minutes to process before we know if it worked. Half hour of twiddling thumbs later, it fails. Some cursing from dev as they go try to fix whatever balked, and I got to spend another 30 minutes resetting all the data so we can try again. Once everything is ready, I push the button. 30 minutes later, it fails again. Fast forward several hours, it's now 5 o'clock Saturday morning, it still hasn't run properly, everybody is cranky except me because baby I got $signs in my eyes. 12 hours of OT for watching Netflix and doing monkey work is gonna be sweet. Except it was even better than I thought at the time. That Saturday was technically some minor holiday. My company pays time and a half if you work on a holiday. So I had 7 hours of overtime, and 5 hours of OT with additional time and a half. I ended up making nearly half a week's pay overnight from that call. My boss flipped when he saw the check I was supposed to get. I reminded him that I had asked in email with half the team copied if he really needed me on the call, and that he said I absolutely had to be. Unlike some of the bosses I read about on here, he swallowed his defeat gracefully. I got a huge paycheck that period, and oddly enough I have not been required to attend a single one of those calls since then. Huh. I wonder why. Side note, Dev worked on it all weekend and got it running by Monday morning, so we were fine. The next one is titled, No Problem, I'll print that video for you. And while I'm at it, I might have you fired as well. Context, this happened a few years ago. I was 18 and working as a receptionist for a community nursing service. As the youngest in the team by a long shot, the average age of employees being around 55 to 60, I was usually the one responsible for the computer stuff, mostly just simple things, nothing a quick Google couldn't solve. The other staff members were wonderful, and I learned a lot from working with them. Except for the assistant manager, Karen. This woman was the bane of my existence. She was 75 plus, recently came out of a 15-year retirement as a receptionist and was armed with a certificate in business management from a 4-hour online course. She refused to learn basic computer skills such as Word or email, stating that she didn't need to learn them when she had others to do it for her, namely me. In a 5-hour shift, I would spend 3 hours just fielding her tasks. Needless to say, this came along with all the fun personality traits that make a manager from hell. Malicious compliance. At the start of my shift, I receive an email from Karen asking me to print the attached files. One was a PDF and the other an MP4. So, assuming she meant just the PDF, I take the printed copy to her. This is roughly how the exchange went. "K, why do you only have one file?" I sent to me. "You want me to print an MP4? K, isn't that what I asked of you? A monkey could do your job, and probably better at that." Here, I'm pretty sure she laughed at her own joke. Me, desperate, "Look, I don't think you understand, K, don't try and teach me. Don't forget I did your job for 20 years and now, I could have you fired." Already over it, and ready for some malicious compliance. Me, "Okay, well, I've never printed this type of file before, so it might take a while." K interrupts, "I don't care how long it takes, I'm your boss and I've told you to do this. Once it's done you can move on to the other jobs." I'm grinning ear to ear at this point. I get back to my desk and send her an email summarizing our conversation and explicitly clarifying she wanted me to print an MP4, to which I got a snarky reply. Perfect. I spent the next 4 to 5 hours, pausing the video every 2 to 3 frames, screenshotting it, pasting it to a Word document and printing. The administrative tasks piled up, not that Karen noticed because she mostly spent her time reading magazines, talking on the phone. I felt bad as this placed an extra load on the other receptionists. However, since Karen was universally hated, they gave me their blessings. Once complete, I took about 100 pages carefully held with clips to her desk and sweetly told her that I'd printed the other file. She looked smug, until she saw what was in front of her. Page after page of almost the same picture as the man moves through the video, some slightly blurry, all in full color. She was furious to say the least, but I was 1 hour overtime on my shift and Karen knew that would already cause her some issues, so she let me leave. Though, I knew it wasn't over. As expected, I get called into HR for a meeting the following week, where they accused me of wasting company time and not complying with management. I explained the situation in detail, and showed them the email and her awful reply. I also showed them a few more emails and texts where Karen used some particularly descriptive words to insult our staff members, including the very HR rep taking my interview. Turns out, this was the straw that broke the camel's back, as Karen had multiple reports against her from other staff members, and she had been driving HR insane with her own complaints. She lost her job the following week. The best part is that this happened on a Sunday, where I got double pay. I took some of that sweet overtime cash and brought in cupcakes to work once Karen was gone. I said it was an end-of-week treat, but we all knew what we were celebrating. The HR rep seemed to particularly enjoy hers. The last one is titled, "We'll just switch to the hot site." I once worked in the IT department for a company that managed some utilities and infrastructure. They had multiple facilities throughout their state, and some extensive redundancy measures in place to keep the buildings connected in case of an emergency. One of the most important of these measures was their hot site, a backup facility that housed a replica of their computer network infrastructure. The hot site was located in a separate building from the main data center, so even if the main building was knocked offline, the hot site would still be available to take over operations. Of course, simply having the equipment and policies to recover from an emergency aren't enough, so the company also had an emergency preparedness committee with representatives from several key departments. The committee held regular simulated emergency drills wherein a member would write and direct an emergency scenario, and the others would rehearse the process of recovering from it. The IT department's contributions to these activities were frequently marginalized by the rest of the committee, who firmly believed that the only appropriate way to handle any computer problem was just to activate the hot site. After all, it is a complete, functional replica of our main systems. Why bother doing anything else when the problem can be instantly solved by simply plugging in a different computer? Well, the thing is that switching to a hot site is easier said than done. Think of it like the spare tire in your car. It's there if you need it, but it doesn't automatically replace a flat tire. You need to spend some time and effort to take the old one off and put the new one on. And once you finish your road trip, you generally want to get the tire properly replaced rather than continuing to use the spare. And if you're having engine problems, you don't solve it by putting on a different tires. And so on. The point is that a hot site doesn't solve every problem, and even if it does, switching to it will take some time. The IT representatives explained that every time, but were always ignored. Finally, one of the network engineers was selected to lead one of the emergency drills, and this guy was fed up with everybody else always suggesting the hot site as a solution. Once the committee had taken their seats to hear what crisis they would be averting that day, the network engineer informed them that the building they currently occupied had just been demolished by a storm, and none of the computer systems there remained. Time to activate the hot site. He grabbed his stuff from the table and left the building. And at that moment, all of the other departments realized that they had no clue how to even get to the hot site. The other IT representatives, being directly responsible for the upkeep of the facility, knew where to go, and were out the door only moments after the network engineer. Everybody else was considerably less prepared to relocate to a different building. If they had looked out the window as the IT people left, they might have seen which direction they had turned out of the parking lot, but nothing more. After all, the hot site is designed to be isolated from anything that would damage the main facility, so it is located a fair distance away. The last of the Emergency Preparedness Committee arrived several hours after the IT department had all arrived on site. Not wanting to admit that they had no clue where they were going, they had no better option than to drive from building to building across the state, hoping that their next destination happened to house the backup facility. By this point, the drill had taken much longer than the schedule had originally allowed, and the network engineer called it off, noting that the site would probably be just about ready to be brought online if they had actually bothered to start setting it up. They didn't, of course, since that would have disrupted the entire network. The IT department wasn't allowed to direct another drill for quite some time after that, but at least everybody else was much more reluctant to suggest the hot site as a catch-all solution. Thanks for listening.